Danful offers unparalleled, curated, and bespoke tours across Africa for travelers seeking genuine cultural experiences, enriched with magnificent sights, sounds, and flavors found on the continent. Each trip is reliably curated to ensure visitors are gifted with an immersive and authentic adventure. Whether you find yourself strolling along the charming white sand beaches of Sierra Leone, feasting on the mouth-watering delicious foods in Senegal, observing or partaking in various aspects of the Isheshi traditional system Ifa native to Yoruba land, Nigeria, with Danful, you will rediscover a fulfilling sense of kinship to the true heart of the motherland, her communities. Our core values focus on integrity, quality, safety, and sustainability. We are uniquely committed to assisting with the advancement of African infrastructure and promoting African businesses, so both travelers and the communities they visit receive beneficial exchanges. At Danful, we understand the importance of connectivity, and we have created a model which provides bespoke experiences based on your passions or hobbies. With us, expect a long-lasting spiritual bond between you and your destinations. Live, love, Danful, Africa. To learn more, visit danful.africa.
At the Okoli Law Group, we specialize in producing justice. If you or a loved one in the Atlanta metro area is facing serious criminal charges, then you need serious legal representation.
The Okoli Law Group is here for you. The Okoli Law Group is here for us.
The Okoli Law Group, serious legal representation.
Peace, family. We are live again. Dynasty Mirror Search for Huru. Thank you all. Thank you so much for joining. Make sure you hit that like button again. Please hit that like button. Also, make sure you share and make sure you subscribe. We got our special guest on, Ebube Okoli. I'm going to bring him on shortly. Have a couple of announcements. Announcement number one. We are rolling to Cape Town. We are rolling to Cape Town for the Cape Town International Jazz Festival. That is March 25th through April 2nd. March 25th through April 2nd. If you're interested in joining us, please visit danful.africa. We are also rolling to Senegal in May for another jazz festival. That's May 9th to the 18th. May 9th to the 18th. In Nigeria in August for the Oshun Festival. That's August 9th to the 18th. In Zanzibar in September 20th to 29th. And then we're rolling to Ivory Coast and Ghana, and that's November 8th to the 19th. And right after that, we're going to do Sierra Leone, November 20th to the 29th. If you're interested in joining us, please visit danfo.africa. Again, if you're interested in joining us, please visit danfo.africa. We'll love to host you on one of our mini adventures. Without further ado, we're going to bring on our in-house lawyer, Esquire, Ebube Okoli, everyone. Welcome, Ebube, y'all. It's been a minute. Ebube. You gotta unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to talk when I'm not on mute. But the Dynasty Mirror, it's a pleasure to be here, brother.
Hey, you too, man. Thank you for joining us again. Yeah, so today's topic, should BRICS be worried or afraid of Donald Trump? Like, should they be worried? Because Trump said, hey, any BRICS country, he's gonna throw tariffs on them. So should they be concerned?
Well, I mean, any serious nation should always be concerned about any type of threat, but it's a very deep analysis. I think this is probably going to be one of the more in-depth analyses, if that's a word, that we have on the situation, and it's a lot to unpack, and I'm really looking forward to getting into it. But in regards to whether they should be concerned, I would say that we have to remember that when it comes to being a superpower, superpowers rise, but then there's potential systematic declines in those superpowers. So what we're going to go over and what we're going to go through is those potential declines of a superpower and how BRICS may amplify that, and what steps need to be taken by the United States in order to maintain dollar hegemony.
I'm trying to get it the full screen view. Hold on 1 second. Come on, Dinas. Is this good, Abube, or do you want?
Yeah, let's get it. Let's get it. For the people tuning in, let's try and get it in presentation mode.
Come on, Dinas.
I think if you right click on the image and maybe click in presentation mode.
Hold on. We here we go. No, that says exit full screen. Here we go. View. There we go. Okay, we good. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. You got it. You got it. All right. So let's go ahead and get into this. And we're going to be answering that question, but we're going to be doing it in a very detailed manner. So now there's a concept that we have to remember, and that concept is that there's America, the country, and then there's America, the empire. So America, the country, was founded with the founding of America, where the 13 colonies essentially rebelled against the British Empire and subsequently filled out the landmass that we call America today. That's the country. But the empire is something very different. The empire are the geopolitical concerns of the United States. Now, in order to be a superpower, this is something that I've put forth in the past before, but in order to be a superpower, you have to have a global currency, you have to have a global economic order, and you also have to have a global military order. So with the United States, there's the global currency, which is the dollar, which is the reserve currency. Although not backed up by gold, it's still the reserve currency. Moreover, there's the global economic order, which is essentially put together by the IMF, the World Bank, and a few other institutions, Western institutions. And then there's the global military order, which is anchored by the U.S. Navy and NATO. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Dennis. So now here's a concept that we have to look at. It's the concept of what is a reserve currency. Now, a reserve currency is something that has widespread adoption, stability, trust, liquidity. It's basically the building block that the other three areas are based on in order to make a superpower. So a reserve currency is basically, if you picture it like this, like any currency that if you were just dropped off in any random place in the world, what currency would you want to have? And that answer is very simple. Now, despite my love for Nigeria, I wouldn't want to be carrying Naira. I would want to be carrying dollars, because I know that if I'm in Australia or Mexico or Sweden, my dollars hold value because the dollar is the reserve currency. So it's essentially the world's currency. And any nation that's blessed to have the world's currency as their currency is going to experience vast benefits. And we're going to get into that in just a second, but let's proceed. Now, I talked about what makes a superpower. Now, we also have to remember that superpowers rise and fall. And there's a lot of books on this. This is a very niche topic, but there's tons of books on the rise and fall of great powers because, like I always say, the language of heaven is mathematics. Logic came with the universe. It's the one thing that's always true, regardless of what we may believe or what we may want to believe. Logic is consistent. Patterns are consistent. So with the rise of a superpower, as I've put forth, my theory is that a superpower is made up of three things: a global currency, a global economic order, and a global military order. There's also a fall of superpowers. So typically, the ability to maintain a reserve currency is necessary to maintain a global economic order. In order to maintain a world economic order, eventually you will need a world military order. So essentially what happens is that the military order is based on the economic order, which is based on having and maintaining the reserve currency as your reserve currency. Once you lose the ability to dominate the world's reserve currency, so does your superpower status vacate. So here's the pattern. And this has been a pattern that's been repeated through history. There's 4 steps, but it can be summed up by saying the superpower who dominates the world system, will eventually ignore the new system being built to challenge its dominance. And by the time the reigning power acts, it's too late, since the new system by its very existence dismantles the apparatus that would have been necessary to defeat the new challenger. Basically, pride and arrogance get the best of the superpower as they are initially dismissive of the new system until it's simply too late. So they basically believe that there couldn't exist a world where they're not number one. A world where they're not number one simply doesn't exist, and that's a mistake that's been made throughout history. So the reigning power is deluded off of its own power, and a rival quietly sets up a trap that will ensnare the lion before the lion knows what's happening. Let's go ahead and go to the next step. So the 4 steps are that a superpower is born because it has those 3 attributes: a global currency, a global economic order, and a global military order. And then somewhere along the line, that superpower weaponizes the system. It either weaponizes the system against its citizens, it weaponizes the system against who it perceives to be its enemies, but it weaponizes the system in a way that creates fear. And one of the greatest forces in this universe is fear. So when you create fear, that's step number 2, is weaponizing the system. The byproduct of that is fear. Step number 3 is that rivals, due to fear and inherent survival, creates alternative systems. And then step number 4 is that there are mass adoptions at critical levels. So the 4 steps to how a superpower falls. Most superpowers aren't taken down militarily. Most superpowers are taken down because of these 4 steps. They're born, they weaponize the system in such a way that creates fear. Rivals, due to that inherent fear, now create alternative systems, and then there's mass adoption of those new systems. Let's go ahead and go into the next one. So now we're focusing on the birth of a superpower. Now, as I stated earlier, a superpower is born by establishing a global currency, global economic order, and a global military order, right? And so a superpower establishes economic control through the establishment of a reserve currency, and that's the foundation for global trade. Now, being the foundation for global trade gives leverage, gives power. And you have to remember, power is the power to exclude. Power is the power to say, you know what, you can no longer do dollar-denominated transactions. You can't do business here. That's one of the most powerful things, is to be able to cut off a nation's money. Now, if you do that, you might be able to get your way in the short term, but by doing something like that, you create fear in everybody else that uses the system, because they now know that this is a very real policy and this is a very real situation. So it's essentially like having the only bridge to town. You can put a toll on that bridge. It's like, for example, if you cross the Verrazano Bridge going into Staten Island from Brooklyn, I haven't driven over that bridge in certain years now, but I remember it was almost $20 to cross that bridge. It's probably more now. But the reason that that's the price is because you're either going to take the ferry. So now you have to go into Manhattan and then from there take the ferry. But if you don't want to do all that and you just want to drive across, that's the price, because there's no other way. So when you control the economic system, you essentially have the only bridge into town. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so now step number 2 in the fall of superpowers is that they over-weaponize the system. Now, if we look at the visual, we see U.S. sanctions across the globe from 1807 until 2025. And these sanctions, they cut across. This is why I don't necessarily believe in the bipartisan, identifying as a Democrat or a Republican, because, at the end of the day, I'm driven by my agenda, and whoever fits neatly within there is who I'll go with for that election cycle. And I always tell people you should be voting in your local elections, in your state elections, and of course national. And you should also be funding your elections. This is just a side note. You should try and figure out who your local politicians are, and from time to time when they're campaigning, donate to their campaigns. You'll be surprised, how much $500 how far $500 can go. But back to weaponization of the system. The reality is that when you control the power, you can abuse it if you want. That's your right. If you want to abuse power, you can do it. But there are also side effects of that. Now, when it comes to weaponization, it's a necessary component, but then it also becomes the catalyst that drives others to create alternatives. And we'll get into some of those, but like I said, it's like if everybody needs your bridge, you can exclude people. But if people are crossing and they see that you're arbitrarily excluding people, and they know that their life depends on this bridge, and they know that the person who controls this bridge sometimes arbitrarily excludes people, or excludes people for good reason, or excludes people generally, they may look for alternatives, because the natural reaction is that if I have to depend on this bridge and this person cuts people off from this bridge, well, I might need an alternate bridge. So the first step is that a superpower is born. The next step is that there's over-weaponization of the system. Now, because there's over-weaponization of the system, this now leads rivals to now look for alternatives. And so once again, we look at the sanctions that America has put across the world. There's sanctions on trade, arms, transportation, travel, sanctions on direct head of states, financial, energy, commodities, and the like. But let's go ahead and go to the next one, Dynasty. So now the first two steps are a superpower is born. The next step is that the superpower weaponizes the system. And then the third step is, as we've been talking about, your rivals are forced to create alternatives, new currencies, alternative trade routes, and form new economic ties and alliances. Now, remember I talked about arrogance early. This is where arrogance kicks in for most superpowers, because the dominant power is usually very dismissive in the early stages and ignores the birth of the very system that will be the doing of their own system. It's just a historical pattern. So step one is that a superpower is born. Step two is that they over-weaponize the system. And then step three is that the over-weaponization of the system creates fear. And that fear now leads to rivals creating systems. And the real game of power is between monopoly and alternatives. So that's going to be very important to remember. The real game is between monopoly versus alternatives. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Now, step 4 in the 4 steps of how a superpower falls, and we're going to look at this from a historical context. Remember, step 1 is establishment. Step 2 is over-weaponization. Step 3 are alternatives are created. And then step 4 is the most pivotal step, because that's mass adoption of the alternative. So by nations or rivals adopting the alternative, you go from being a monopoly to just an option. Now, there's a lot of power when you're the only bridge into town. However, when someone sets up a bridge half a mile away, that's the same distance across the river, it becomes different. You no longer have a monopoly. You now have to compete as an option. And the problem that happens is oftentimes when we have a monopoly on something, we don't compete well because we never had to compete. It was our way or the highway. And so we're looking to potentially be in step 4 within the next, I would say, 3 to 7 years, maybe sooner. The scale and adoption that we're seeing is happening fast. So America's economic system, currently they can lock you out of the system, which can wreak economic havoc. You have to be a very strong and hardy nation to be able to survive economic sanctions from the United States, because they essentially make it so that you can't do business. And most business is done in dollars, so they cut you off from the dollar system. And if they do that, let's say you have oil, trillions of dollars of oil, but you can't sell it, so now your nation is broke. So people, or nations, I should say, notice these things and they create alternatives. So those are the 4 steps. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. We're going to look at this in a historical context to see how these 4 steps were applied. So now remember, there's establishment of the superpower, weaponization of the system, alternatives are created. And then the fourth step is that there's mass adoption of the alternatives that reaches a critical mass, which creates alternatives and destroys a monopoly. And once the monopoly is destroyed, that's the end of most superpowers, because if your reserve currency is no longer the currency of the world, then you can no longer control the economic order, because you can't control trade or currency. And if you can't control both trade and currency, then you can't have enough money to maintain a global military presence to the point where you have military in every critical point of the globe that you need it. So now if we look at Rome in the 2nd century AD, the denarius was the global reserve of the known world, the Mediterranean. Trade across the Mediterranean was done exclusively in their currency. Trade routes were controlled by Rome. Roman laws applied to every single trade. Roman military reigned over such areas. And this lasted for about 200 years. So the dinar in Rome was made out of silver. And that was the value. In the Roman Empire, you traded silver for value, for goods, for services. And that was the law. It was dinars that were crafted by the Roman Empire. They're about 95% silver. And this was a good system because this allowed the Roman Empire during its 200-year peak to maintain a massive military that stretched from London to the Middle East. And they could also fund massive infrastructure projects. Some of these projects are still present till today. Most of the tourism of Italy is based on the infrastructure that the Romans built in the 2nd century AD. So that should let you know how powerful that what they did, the foundation that they laid, is still a moneymaker for Italy centuries after. So now the problem came because Rome made an error. The thing about Roman emperors is they kept trying to show each other up. They kept trying to push the empire further and further and further out, which required them to make more money. They were expanding faster than their tax base. So they couldn't raise enough taxes to pay for this rapid, insane level of expansion. But then they believed that we're Rome. We can do it all. The Roman Empire will never fall. The sun will never set on the Romans. So they made a mistake and they weaponized their currency, and they said, you know what? Instead of our currency being 95% silver, we'll drop it to maybe 4% silver. But it doesn't matter that people are, and they use cheaper metals like bronze and iron for the denarius. And so essentially people were trading worthless pieces of bronze for actual goods and services, which was unfair to the actual citizens of the empire, because you've essentially taken away any money and you've told them to continue to use this asset as if it's worth something when it was completely worth less. But it was because of pride and hubris that the Romans said, well, in their arrogance, we're Rome, we can do it. And so what happened is that in the short term, this was okay, but nobody wants a currency that's rapidly losing value. And so to the north of Rome, the Germanic tribes started making their own currency. And of course, their own currencies were made out of precious metal. So on the northern fringes of Rome, you had citizens who wanted to trade with the barbarians in order to get the barbarians' currency. Out in the Asian flanks of Rome, you had the Persians who set up trade networks that completely circumvented the Romans. And they circumvented all the points at which the Romans could collect taxes. After that, the Silk Road, of course, went through, and you had the merchants who moved along that, who traded silks and all sorts of precious items. They only dealt with gold. They exclusively said, we don't deal with Roman dinars. It's a worthless currency. We only deal in gold because that's the real currency. And that's a reoccurring theme that we're going to continue to see. So now, if you see what just happened to Rome, this is why Rome fell. A lot of people wonder, well, why did Rome fall? I mean, Rome existed in weakened states, you know, the Eastern, the Western, whatever. But I'm talking about the high point of Rome, and Rome had the reserve currency. That was when it was a superpower. Rome survived another 120 years before just completely falling in on itself after these events, but they were never the same Rome again. And that was because they lost the reserve currency, because they woke up one day and they realized that 57% of the world's trade at that time was done completely outside of Rome, not being taxed by Rome. Rome didn't get a piece. And then Rome also, their currency wasn't being used. So they lost their reserve currency, and that's what made them fall apart. So by 300 AD, the currency had lost 91% of its value. And remember, it's monopoly versus alternatives. So people eventually just went with what made sense. And that wasn't Rome's system. So by the time Rome looked up, it was over. And like I said, they kind of hobbled along for another 110, 107 years, but it was truly over. But let's go ahead and go to the next one. We're gonna move up to the early 19th century. And if you remember, the pound sterling was boss. London was the center of finance. 77% of the world's trade was done in pound sterling. A quarter of the world's land and population was controlled by the crown. The Navy ruled the high seas. Their banks dominated the globe. Lloyd's of London had a high point during this time. International debt between two sovereign nations was paid in pound sterling. Britain essentially held the world's currency, the world's reserve currency, and that's why they were the superpower. Now, this went until about World War I. World War I started and it changed the entire dynamic. Britain was the world's bank. Unfortunately, it found itself in a position where it had to fund the world's most expensive war to date. Millions of soldiers, naval blockades, several continents. They had to borrow, they printed, they weaponized their system to freeze German assets, and they also weaponized their system against even their own allies and their own Commonwealth of Nations to enforce compliance. So once again, if we look at the 4 steps, establishment of a superpower by having a currency that's the world reserve currency, then they weaponize that due to the weaponization of that system that they're in control of. And you have to remember, it's like, imagine being a player and a referee. Of course, Donis, you played sports. You understand the immense power that you would have if you were a player and a ref. Now, if for some reason you found yourself being a player and a referee, it would be a difficult position because you would have to be extremely fair. But anytime you weaponize the fact that you're both a player and a referee, people might start looking to play in another league. That's essentially what happens when you're a nation that's competing against other nations, and then you weaponize the system that you yourself control because you're supposed to be viewed as a neutral. But the reality is that's not how power works. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so enter the United States as an alternative. Remember, the running theme has been an alternative versus the monopoly. So we saw Rome had the alternative, had the monopoly. However, with the Persians, with the barbarians, and of course the Silk Road, and those who traded along that from Asia, they essentially set up an alternative network. And whenever there's a monopoly and it now becomes open market, if you will, the former power who was a monopoly typically doesn't know how to compete in a situation where they can't simply dictate the rules to those who are engaged in the game. So now Britain, because they had to overextend themselves in a massive war, and you have to remember the war was fought in Europe. America fought in the war. However, they didn't fight in the war. They fought the war in Europe. America was untouched outside of, in World War II, outside of maybe Pearl Harbor. But even Pearl Harbor wasn't the mainland, and I don't believe Pearl Harbor was a state at that time. But America simply started building an alternative system to the Brits. Now, this system wasn't bogged down by wartime conditions, as America fought in the war, but you have to remember, the war was far from America. America started offering lower interest loans. America accumulated almost half of the world's gold supply. So what America did is America, when they saw that Britain was having problems and that the pound sterling wasn't the pound sterling of yesteryear, they started requiring gold for their services. Now, America during World War I, World War II, that's where you have the famous image of Rosie the Riveter. America was actually in very dire states before those wars. Those wars actually helped America out immensely. The Great Depression was ravaging America, but America was able to America had, I think, 27% unemployment, which is insane if you really just think about it. If you think about America having that almost one in four, 1 in 3 people just didn't have a job, couldn't find a job, regardless of how skilled you were. What they did is, with about 15% of the people, they put them in uniform, gave them a job as a soldier. The other 12%, they put them in a uniform and put them in a factory. And they were making war instruments for the entire world. It lifted America out of poverty. It put America in a position where America could demand gold and hard currencies, proper currencies for their services. Now, America started creating the rival system once they realized that they had the advantage. Now, the system that they created wasn't bogged down by wartime conditions. America started offering lower interest loans. Prior to that, Britain, you had to go to Britain to receive any type of loan. America started offering lower interest loans because they weren't affected by the war. And as I stated earlier, they accumulated almost half the world's gold supply. Now, Britain ignored this because they considered America to be a nation that could never do what Britain did. Similar to the Romans, they said it's America. They almost viewed America as a little brother who never quite grew up. Like, it's America. They looked at them as a permanent junior partner. However, Britain was shocked at the Bretton Woods when the Bretton Woods Convention was called in 1944. America openly declared itself the new boss and repositioned the dollar as the new world's reserve currency, since they owned almost half the world's gold. So because Europe had destroyed themselves and they were in bad needs of loans, America said, hey, look, we're going to rebuild your nations. That's why you should take a look at the Marshall Plan if you ever have time. America said, we're going to rebuild your nations, but we're going to rebuild them. And because we're rebuilding them, we are the architect. We are going to put ourselves on the top of the system. Now, you either take our loans and take money from us, or you stay in a destroyed state because you guys destroyed yourself in 2 great wars. And of course, Western Europe agreed, and partially because they needed to stop Russia. Otherwise, Russia would have conquered all the way up until probably Portugal, had America not stepped in and rebuilt Western Europe and turned them into actual allies. But of course, that came with a price. If someone rebuilds you and turns you into a powerful nation, they created you. They made you what you are. They dictate how you're going to fit into their system. So at that point, Britain lost, the pound sterling lost its place as the reserve currency. And shortly after losing its monopoly on the reserve currency, Britain's empire fell apart because it didn't have the money to maintain the military necessary to rule 25% of the world from London. So 3 years after losing the reserve currency, India left, and Pakistan left, then eventually Nigeria left, and the rest is history. Everybody left the British Empire, and Britain didn't have the military to fight them because all of these nations were bigger than Britain. So Britain would have to invade with British people. And Nigeria was almost 2 times the size. India was 3 times the size. Pakistan was 2 times the size of Britain. And you lost the global currency, which means you lost control of the economy, which means you simply didn't have enough money to maintain the military necessary to fight 25% of the world in order to maintain your empire. So Britain didn't lose the war. They lost the monopoly on the reserve currency. And when countries have an alternative that offers them better results, they exercise them. That's human nature. If you're given a choice between 2 things, you're always going to go with what the best thing is for you. So the game is, like I said, monopoly versus alternatives. And when the alternatives reach critical mass, the monopoly simply dies because logically it can't exist. So regardless of how powerful your system or your empire once was, once you lose reserve currency status, the empire is done for. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so America is now the new boss. Enter weaponization. Now, it's just natural. It's not a bad thing to weaponize the system. I mean, it's just one of those things. If it's a tool in your disposal and you can use it to your power, you can use it, but you have to remember that it's like a trade-off. It's not something that you can use free of consequence. Because when you weaponize the system, you create fear in the people that use that same very system, because the question that they're logically going to ask themselves is, could this be me? Could this be me? So enter America as the empire. And remember, there's a difference between America as the empire and America as the nation. And so at this point, with Bretton Woods, with the Bretton Woods system, America went from being a nation to now being an empire. And so you got to remember, though, for years prior, America wasn't really taken serious. It was almost a joke among the traditional European powers. But after taking the reserve currency status in 1944, America came to dominate global trade as the dollar became the reserve currency. And once that happened, we are now in the empire phase of America. 90% of global trade involved dollars at some point. The SWIFT financial system, controlled by America and its allies, handles, till today, over 40 million messages a day. And those are basically transactions. Trillions of dollars in global transactions. Basically, to do international business, you need access to dollars, you need American permission, and you have to use America's system, but at a price. So America essentially became the only bridge to economic prosperity because they controlled the dollar. And in the American system, all international business was done in the dollar. So when you're in complete control, eventually one's going to weaponize the system to a level that creates fear. Now, this fear is a natural byproduct, and this drives other competitive nations to create alternatives to now fight the monopoly. So weaponization of the dollar occurred at levels never witnessed before in peacetime settings. In 2014, I know we all remember 2014, it's 12 years ago. I still remember it like it's yesterday. In 2014, Russia invaded and annexed Crimea. It was a little peninsula off of the coast of Ukraine. Now, once Russia did that, the Obama administration cut Russia out of the dollar markets. $500 billion in Russian assets was frozen. Russia was denied SWIFT access. Russian banks couldn't access Western capital. And this was all done with the stroke of a pen in the White House unilaterally. You know how much power that is? When someone can sit in America without firing any missiles, without deploying any troops, they can essentially cut you off. And the rest of the world looked and they said, this is Russia. Now, Russia, they're only a $2 trillion economy. They're more of a legacy country because you tie them to the Soviet Union. But Russia isn't what it used to be. But still, it's Russia. They have nuclear weapons, tons of natural resources, a $2 trillion economy, even though America's economy is almost, 12 times bigger than Russia's. Russia's still viewed as, the land power. So other nations saw this and they said, if this can happen to Russia, this can happen to any of us. Not only that, there came the sanctions on Iran. Iran was cut off from SWIFT, dollar markets. Iran couldn't sell their oil because all oil sales had to be in dollars. Iran didn't have access to dollars. Iran has access to a bunch of oil, but couldn't sell it. So now their budgets in their country became very strained because the government didn't have money. And when the government doesn't have money, people start to protest. Now, the thing about this is that Russia, and this can be a very deep conversation, but Russia was able to survive sanctions because Russia had a lot of natural resources. And one of the things Russia has is gold. So what Russia did is they had private firms that were actually harvesting gold, and they basically created a law that says the Russian government has first right of refusal on any gold that's found in Siberia or anywhere in Russia. So they basically bought up tons of gold. And they basically said this much gold is worth this much of our currency. So they de facto connected their currency to gold. That was the only reason they were able to survive American sanctions. A weaker nation probably would have been destroyed, meaning the government would have collapsed. Russia survived because Russia is vast and Russia has a lot of gold and natural resources. Otherwise, Russia probably would be in civil war right now, and there would have been a total collapse. So now, we talked about Iran or Persia, Venezuela. There were sanctions, Syria, North Korea, Belarus. But the real interesting point came with Afghanistan. Now, in Afghanistan, this isn't new news. In 2021, the Taliban took control of the government. And of course, the Taliban's an easier target. It's very few people that are going to agree with the Taliban. Those guys are some bad guys. As Trump would say, some bad hombres. But the Biden administration, what they did is they just seized all of the money out of the Afghan central bank. So the Afghanistan central bank had just over $7 billion in there. And the Biden administration said, you know what, we're just going to take all of the money out of your central bank. And it was $7 billion, 3.5 of it was used for humanitarian efforts. I think it had something to do with 9/11 and some other things with that, compensating some of the survivors. And then America took the other 3.5 and did something else with it. But, say what you want to say about the Taliban. Of course, they're nobody that should be defended, for obvious reasons. But at the same time, they are running a sovereign nation. And so when India and Brazil and Russia and China saw that America could literally take your central bank account, and you got to remember, that's the account that countries use to pay their civil servants, pave roads, keep electricity on, build hospitals, run the government, basically their bank account. When those nations saw that you can just take their bank account from Washington, not even like you just did something on a computer in Washington and you removed all the money from their central bank, that was really one of the final straws for a lot of the nations that realized, wait a minute, what if America decides to do that to me next? What can I do? And I understand why America did it, but at the same time, you have to understand that for every action, there is a reaction. Rules of nature. So let's go ahead and go to the next one. So now, the BRICS started off quietly. After 2021, they had meetings, and they had to figure out something because, Russia, Iran, China, they're not necessarily the best friends of the United States. Not saying that they're enemies of the United States, but they had serious discussions because if America could do that to a sovereign nation, what stops them? And then they could ban Russia from SWIFT and almost destroy Russia. If Russia wasn't filled with gold and they basically pegged their currency informally, it was an informal way they did it. If they weren't able to do that, Putin's Russia would have collapsed. He would have been overthrown, and Russia would probably be mired in civil war similar to Libya right now. So, of course, Russia said something has to change. We can't put ourselves in such a susceptible system that we're using our enemy's system for our nation's survival. No serious nation is going to rely on your enemy for survival. So remember, step one is birth of a superpower. Step two is the superpower weaponizing their system to a point that creates fear within the users of said system. Step three, alternatives. And remember, step three is the most pivotal step because it's monopoly versus alternatives. So now, the BRICS, they started putting together step three, the alternatives. So now they created a system, and currently 23 countries are looking to join. Half of the developing world is signing up to join. And the crazy thing is, these aren't failed states. These are economic heavyweights. You have the second largest economy. You have Russia. You have these Gulf states with oil. And you have to remember, and Don, this is something we have to cover. You got to remind me. You know, I'm dealing with a RICO case right now, but when I find some free time, we got to talk about the petrodollar, because that is that's a very important thing that's happening right now. And of course, the mainstream media doesn't necessarily cover these topics. These are topics that you have to kind of analyze on your own, but we may be seeing the fall of the petrodollar, which is going to create a very interesting dynamic because Saudi Arabia, of course, some of the more, and luckily for the United States, they did what they had to do to secure some of the larger oil deposits in the Western Hemisphere. But of course, that's another topic. We'd have to talk about that a lot later and in a lot more depth. But let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so with the new system, China and Russia already do about 73% of bilateral trade outside of America's system. Saudi Arabia is also selling oil in local currency to China. Now, this is a very big deal. And this is one of the reasons that, I've given up on mainstream media. But this is a very big deal. Saudi Arabia is selling oil in local currencies to China at that. And so you have to remember that I'll briefly touch on the petrodollar, but okay. So remember, a superpower is based on the fact that you have a global reserve currency. So now, when you have a global reserve currency, you can now build a global economy based on that currency because you have a monopoly. Now remember, the game is monopoly versus alternatives. You have to make sure that there is no alternative that will challenge dollar hegemony. Now, with that economy, you make so much money because everyone is looking for your currency. So you're going to be a rich nation because you print dollars and they give you real resources. They give you diamonds, oil, gold, and you give them pieces of paper you print it out. So now imagine just in your regular life, you own a printer that prints dollars. There's nothing you can't get. You just go upstairs into your house and you press print and you grab $1 million. And everybody is looking for your currency. That's a very special position. You should dominate the world if you have the ability to do that. So that's the key of having a reserve currency. However, when people circumvent this system, they're reducing your power because they're not acting within your system. So what we have here is that the system is slightly being dismantled. So when it comes to payment systems, Russia has SPSF, similar to SWIFT. And if you don't know what SWIFT is, it's America and her allies' systems in order to do transactions, international transactions. So here's where SWIFT comes into play. Let's say I'm in Nigeria and I want to buy cocoa from Ghana. I want to buy $2.6 million of raw shea and $4.2 million of raw cocoa from Ghana, Nigeria to Ghana. And now I think Ghana has the cedi, Nigeria has naira. what we're going to do is I'm going to send the Naira equivalent to the United States, to their system. They're going to convert my Naira into dollars, and then they're going to send that back to Ghana. And in Ghana, it's going to get converted to the local currency. And that's how we do business. So it's like, you ever seen that movie King of New York? It's like,
yeah, I seen it. That's actually a good movie.
Yeah, it's like a Nick sold in the park, I want in. It's like that, right? So any transaction between nations, even if it's a nation in Africa to another nation in Africa, under the traditional SWIFT system in the dollar denominated system, you would send money to America. America would send that money back and then allow it. America also has to approve the transaction, which gives America a lot of power, because America could say, yeah, we're not going to approve it. But really, America should approve it because they should be neutral, because it's just business. However, when you weaponize the system, like I said, you create fear. So now in the current, or in the previous system, money would be sent to America, there'd be fees, and Africa spends about $5.3 billion annually just in fees. And these are just banking fees of doing business within themselves. However, there's a system that Africans have created to circumvent that, and we'll get into that in just a second. But of course, Russia has SPSF, China has UPI, CIPS, India has UPI, Singapore has joined on board, and these are all direct alternatives to the SWIFT payment system, and they're up and running now. And here's the thing. This isn't theory. They're processing trillions of dollars in global trade annually. Every transaction done through these systems is a transaction that doesn't involve the United States. It doesn't involve their Western allies. It doesn't involve SWIFT, nor does it involve the dollar. So remember, alternatives versus monopolies. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, so these are the payment systems that were created. And as I stated earlier, Russia and China are doing business amongst themselves. And this is a topic that's not really, and like I said, this is why I don't subscribe to the Democrat, Republican, as what is it, Gen Z? Is that the new one? Is that the newest one, Gen Z? I think. As Gen Z would say, when it comes to politics, I'm non-binary, I have an agenda, I have an understanding, whatever party or politician aligns with that understanding for the moment is who I'll allow to have my vote. People got to start valuing their votes a lot more, and informing themselves and coming to a conclusion, and then whoever supports the conclusion that you come to, support that person. But of course, China has their system. Russia has their system. And the interesting thing about the system that the BRICS nations are setting up, it's not really an overarching system. It's more so a system that glues all these intermediate separate systems together and allows them to talk directly with each other in an attempt to just simply bypass the American system. So there's a lot of benefits, and remember, when you're given options, you're going to go with the option that best suits you. That's just human nature. That's just what's going on. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right, and here's where Africa comes in. Now remember, prior I talked about the fact that there was if I wanted to buy raw shea butter, raw shea nuts, and cocoa from Ghana, a couple $1 million worth, I would have to process that transaction through the United States in order to get a hard currency. But with the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System, PAPSS, it's a centralized, cloud-based, real-time financial market infrastructure designed to facilitate secure cross-border payments in local currencies across Africa. So that basically means that I can just pay someone in Naira in Ghana, and it'll automatically transfer my money to the local currency in Africa, which is really what we need. And this is another thing too. I think Pan-Africanism, that word's become like a bad word on the internet for some reason, but most people don't understand. It's crazy too. Like,
hey, real quick, Ebube, side note. Do you follow? Do you keep up with Tariq Nasheed?
I don't. I met him one time though. It was a while ago, like 10 years ago, I think I met him. He's about my height. That's the one thing I remember about him. I'm like 6'5". He's like, we're looking eye to eye. He seemed like a cool guy, but I don't really follow him too much. What's going on?
No, well, part of the reason why the Pan-Africanism has become a bad word is because this FBA movement, and there a lot of them are anti-Pan-Africanism now. So, but it's interesting. He was in Senegal last week, and I just thought it was funny because the amount of virtue he has for Africans. I just thought it was, hilarious that he was in Senegal last week. But
so he's against Africans, but he's in Africa.
Exactly. Well, so they're starting to spin it like, well, he's not really against Africans, but if you listen to his rhetoric, man, it's very, very anti-African. So I just thought it was hilarious.
Well, then that's hypocrisy. If you're anti-African, but then you're in Africa, he's having a good time over there.
I guess so. Yeah.
And no,
I saw him eating the food.
Come on, then, man. Like,
he talks shit about the food and all that shit. And he's over there eating jollof rice. I'm like, come on, man.
No, man. Listen, if you got to be consistent all the way across the board. But anyway, so hey, we'll see what happens to him in that situation. Hopefully, he has a great time, and maybe that changes his opinion, and he doesn't, degrade Africa. Hopefully, he comes back with a new mind state. But Pan-Africanism, and the thing about Pan-Africanism is this, and really, Pan-Africanism is an ideology. It can never die. I remember some content creators were saying Pan-Africanism is dead, but the thing about Pan-Africanism is that Pan-Africanism is just one P. The other P of Pan-Africanism is power. If you don't have any power, then it doesn't matter. I remember there's a content creator on the internet, and they were saying, Pan-Africanism is dead. I'm not a Pan-Africanist, which is cool because there's no additional P. The P is power. You got to have an economy, a military, a currency, and so Pan-Africanism plus power is really what we're looking for. So these African nations, they have trillions of dollars in economic power, and they do trillions of dollars of transactions. That's the other P, that's power. Now, rather than them being taxed billions just to do these transactions among themselves, they've created the PAPSS system as well as the PAPSS card, which is essentially like a Visa card that you can use. It's tied to your bank account, but you can use it in any African country. So basically, with this card, you can travel to Morocco, to South Africa, to Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, Mauritania, Niger, Ghana, and you can use this same card with the Naira that you loaded up in Nigeria. So it's actually a beautiful thing. So you got to remember, some guy on the internet, content creator saying Pan-Africanism is dead. You got to remember that person doesn't have power. The people that really matter when it comes to Pan-Africanism are those with the additional P, and that P is power. And so we're seeing some good things right here because you should be able to travel around Africa. And if I want to spend Naira in Ghana, I shouldn't have to convert it through a hard currency or through US dollars before I pay my brother in Ghana. And so what BRICS is looking to do is they formally requested to connect the Pan-African payment system to the global system and basically take the thing global, which is going to be a big game changer. Because remember, the running theme here is monopoly versus alternatives. And if the alternatives are just better, human nature dictates that you're going to take the alternatives. It's just how it goes. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. All right. So we're talking about gold accumulation and the new development bank. So one thing to remember is that this is why you got to be a student of history. This is why John Heinrich Clarke said one of his favorite histories to study. He liked African history, but he only studied African history to see where we went wrong. Because he said we clearly went wrong somewhere, from where we were to where we are. And I, as a kid reading his books, it really influenced me a lot because that's a very true statement. You read about what we were able to accomplish, you would think by this point we'd be some of the most advanced people in the world, but unfortunately that's not the same true. That's not true because of a series of mistakes that we made that we're just now re-examining. I'm not sure if we truly learned from those mistakes, but I take it upon myself because John Henry Clarke said he liked studying African history, but he liked studying European history even more, right? To see where they got it right. And so a lot of other nations are students of history. And so what China is doing is China's studying America. So when America took power from Britain, when it took power from its older brother and said, I'm going to be the new world boss, the dollar is going to be the world currency, the greenbacks are going to run the economy. They saw that America made the dollar the global reserve when it had almost half of the world's gold supply. However, recently, BRICS nations have began stockpiling gold at unprecedented rates. In 2023, China amassed over 225 tons of gold alone that year. However, most analysts believe that it's a lot more because China allegedly has a proclivity to purchase gold through informal routes, meaning that allegedly China doesn't ask questions about how you got this gold, where you got this gold from. As long as you got the gold and it's legit, they're willing to take it, allegedly. So some people allege that 225 tons is only 20 to 30% of what they actually got. They just allege that China got it in ways that are, I'll just leave it at that.
Black market.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. But Russia as well has been doing the same thing for 11 years. We have to remember that Russia was able to survive American sanctions by essentially pegging their currency to gold. What they did is they told every private gold harvester in their country, hey, we're going to buy whatever gold comes out of this country, and we're going to buy it at this percentage of our currency, which means that you've de facto, in a lot of ways, connected your currency to gold. Hey, Don, it looks like you got a super chat. You want to read it or you want me to keep going?
Yeah, no, I'm going to read it right now. Dynas, come on, bro. Invite Frank Zanu. I'll reach out to Frank. I'm going to reach out to Frank. All right, go ahead.
All right. So Russia's been stockpiling gold out of necessity due to the sanctions that was put on them after they invaded Crimea. India also has been purchasing hundreds of tons of gold. And remember, gold is king at the end of the day. Gold can't be sanctioned, frozen, overprinted. And then we have to remember that the BRICS have recently set up the New Development Bank, which is an alternative to the World Bank. That bank is funding billions of dollars of projects. And instead of giving loans in dollars, they're giving loans in local currencies. The reason that's important is because, let's say, and I like to use Nigeria as an example. That's where I'm from. That's where I was born. It's where I spent a lot of my time as a child and as an adult. The thing about gold is that gold can't be sanctioned. And so the smart thing is that now you take that gold and you use it to give loans, and you give loans in the local currency. And if I'm Nigerian, the Nigerian government, for example, and I want to take a loan, it's better for me to take a loan in my local currency than for me to take a loan in dollars, because I might take a loan in dollars when Naira is 800 to a dollar. What happens when Naira becomes 1,005 to a dollar? I still have to exchange that 1,005 for a dollar at a cost just to pay a debt, which makes it increasingly more difficult to pay the debt, especially if the debt lasts maybe 10 to 15 years and my currency severely depreciates against the dollar, then I'm never able to pay off that debt. Now I have to seek loan forgiveness. However, if the loan is in my local currency, I can always deal with that loan. So remember, alternatives versus monopolies. The new development bank, which is the rival that the BRICS have set up to rival the World Bank and IMF, when they do infrastructure projects, they're doing it and giving loans in the local currency. The IMF and World Bank are giving loans in dollars. So remember, anytime you provide an alternative, people tend to go with the alternative if it benefits them. So now the bank is funding billions of dollars worth of infrastructure projects all over the globe in local currency, not dollars. So now trade flow exists that doesn't need Western approval or even Western notice. And now the currency is said to be launching. Some have reported that it's already launched. And Adonis, that's something we got to report on another broadcast, because that topic is at least an hour worth of discussion and analysis alone. But it's alleged, and I've been keeping up on it, and some of my contacts that are in certain places have told me that the currency's here, and it's here to stay, and it's going to be backed by gold. So now, if you remember what America did to the UK by introducing a gold-backed currency in order to become the global world reserve currency, we might ask ourselves, are we seeing history repeat itself? So now, all this is occurring, but Washington seems to be at a loss, since this is the first time America has faced such a situation. And of course, the mainstream media isn't really covering these topics. And that's why it's good, Dinas, that you got a platform like this that we can discuss high-level topics that actually affect America as a country and as the empire. I've been watching mainstream media, and it seems like it's mostly immigration enforcement, which is a very important topic. But what about the de-dollarization of the world's global economy? You know, that's really not a topic you're not going to see on conservative stations or liberal stations. It's like everybody's so caught up in the Democrat versus Republican thing that they don't really understand that politics, it's not supposed to be divisive. It's supposed to be, here's the best way for the nation to move forward in relation to the entire globe, versus let's get bogged down in the minutia of whether or not we believe that this agency is moving properly. But we have to look at the reality, and the reality is that the dollar's share of global reserves of central banks across the world was 73% in 2001, and today it's between 57 and 58%. That's more than a 15% drop in just over 20 years. And it's picking up the pace. The decline was 1% per year for the first decade. Now it's approaching 2% per year. Central banks are moving away from the dollar and diversifying, not because they dislike America, but because they understand that if there's going to be a weaponization of the system, then they necessarily need alternatives for their self-preservation. So currently, BRICS nations represent 45% of the global population, 40% of the global GDP, 42% of global oil production, 53% of global wheat, 61% of global steel production. And this is basically half of the world and half of the world's system that doesn't have to use or require the American system. Let's go ahead and go to the next one, Donis. All right, so currently it appears that Washington doesn't quite know how to handle this. Using more sanctions will only accelerate the fear and push people away from the dollar. Now, as one can see, we're at step 3. Alternatives are available, they're in use, and the speed that we're heading to step 4 is historically only a matter of time. However, things can be done to mitigate that. Step 4, of course, is mass adoption, thus the elimination of the monopoly of the dollar as the global reserve system. It means that the dollar becomes one option amongst many, like the pound or the euro. And here's the difficult part. If the dollar loses its place as the reserve currency, living standards will drastically decline. If the US dollar loses its reserve currency status, the US will likely face higher borrowing costs, elevated inflation, and reduced geopolitical influence as global demand for treasuries drop. This shift, it would force higher interest rates, it would impact consumer loans, government spending, while potentially driving a shift towards a fragmentation or a multipolar global monetary system. The US would lose its ability to easily impose economic sanctions, which is a tool that's currently been granted to the American system by the dollar-based trade. A weaker dollar would make imports more expensive, or would mean higher inflation for consumers and businesses. Now, without high foreign demand for US debt, the US government would face high interest rates and it would be difficult to attract investors, leading to higher costs for mortgages, auto loans, business loans. And if we look at the current reality, America runs an $800 billion trade deficit year in and year out. America imports more than it exports. More is consumed than produced. The only way America can do this and be a successful country is because it has the status of the dollar as the gold reserve. Demand is created. America prints the paper. The world gives America real goods in exchange for those papers because everyone needs dollars, because if you're going to do global trade is done in dollars. Monopoly. But what happens if people stop needing the dollars due to alternatives? Well, at that point, you got real inflation. Not like the 3% that the Fed targets, but real inflation, like double-digit inflation. America as a whole would still be importing the goods that we normally do, but we wouldn't be able to pay the prices that we normally pay. We pay a lot more since we don't manufacture anything in this country. A middle-class lifestyle would require a lot more than it currently does. In last year's fiscal year last year, the United States spent about $987 billion to $1 trillion on net interest payments for the national debt. That's more than defense. It's more than Medicare. That's just interest. So imagine having a credit card where you got to pay $1 trillion in interest. Now, the interest expense has nearly tripled since 2020, and it's now one of the largest expenditures in the federal budget of $34 trillion. Now, the interest on that is low because the demand for the dollars is so high, because nations need America's bonds. But if that changes, the interest rates could triple or quadruple. And if interest rates spike at that level, that means that the $1 billion figure could become $3 to $4 billion. Now, with that figure, America's budget's just unsustainable. The current budget is unsustainable. Everything would have to be cut. Almost 90% of government-ran social programs wouldn't be sustainable. Now, America would have to enter an age of austerity. There'd be military cuts. And remember, if you don't have the reserve currency, you don't have the economic order, you can't afford a military order. And if you can't afford a military order, then you can't project power. America has over 800 bases in over 70 countries, 11 carrier strike groups around the world. This can't be sustained unless America controls the reserve currency. And so America wouldn't be able to have a dominant military position in hot spots across the globe because it simply wouldn't have the global economic order or the global currency order. So some of the solutions for America would be to stop weaponizing the dollar. No more sanctions, because sanctions lead to fear. Fear leads to alternatives being sought. More alternatives being sought further reduces American power, dollar dependency. Less dollar dependency means a less American power. Less American power means fewer tools, except sanctions, which are creating the problems. So we have to also simply just stop weaponizing the dollar for every foreign policy, negotiate multilateral frameworks that to give other countries more assurance in the system. America has to start competing now because there are alternatives. So America has to start competing by offering better terms instead of threats. And then America has to have disciplined budgets that actually reduce spending and national debt. Now, this is one of the things that, Donald Trump, for all his problems, he did get it right. America has to reduce spending. You got $1 trillion interest payments on your debt right now. If anything happens to the dollar, it'll be 4 trillion. And now you got to pay 4 trillion rather than paying 1 trillion. So imagine if you pay that 1 trillion and then something bad does happen to the dollar. Well, you saved yourself a little bit. But Donis, it seems like you got a super chat.
Yeah. Shout out to Philly Yardy Vibes 808. Thank you for $10 holla. In light of what you are revealing, our gold and silver stocks is good investment. This is not financial advice, but if Abube wants to answer, he can. But again, this is not financial advice. Please invest at your own risk. All right, go ahead.
All right. Well, no, he's brought up an interesting point. So, for example, if you look at the reason why gold is so high, you realize that, hey, a lot of nations are seeking out gold right now. So, of course, the price of gold is going to be high because so many people are looking for gold. So, but what's going to happen, and this isn't financial advice, but what comes up must go down. And when that gold leaves, it might go into the smaller caps, and that's when everybody might have that crypto. Of course, this isn't financial advice, but gold has been on a run. Silver has been on a run. We're slightly deviating here, but I do like to talk about finance and investments. That's how I was able to make my first million. But you do want to see where the money's moving. So whoever made that comment, they're showing that they have a good understanding of things. But just understand that eventually things are going to move out to another area, and you want to kind of be there first to be able to ride that wave. But when you understand the real political issues, like I said, everybody's so bogged down on immigration enforcement, which is an important topic. It's a topic that must be discussed, topic that must be understood. But then topics like the de-dollarization of the global order, that really needs to be discussed as well. And it's almost like we're leaving those topics to just focus exclusively on, the few topics that get everybody riled up. And I think that's just a function of the mainstream media. That's just what they do. But what we need to focus on is the pattern. We have to remember that there's the 4 steps within the pattern. The 4 steps are that a superpower is born, a superpower weaponizes the system. Due to the weaponization of that system, those who use the system are guided by fear to seek alternatives. And once those alternatives reach critical mass, then the reserve currency, as we've seen historically, is lost by the dominant power who initially had that global reserve currency. So that's where we are right now. Oh, so Dynas, here's what I'm going to do.
Go ahead.
We got some people that want to call in, right?
Yeah. So what I'll do, I'll put the link in the chat room, let them call in, but we'll take a quick commercial break real quick. But guys, links in the chat room. If you want to call in and have the conversation, you're more than welcome to click on that link and call in.
Danful offers unparalleled, curated and bespoke tours across Africa for travelers seeking genuine cultural experiences, enriched with magnificent sights, sounds, and flavors found on the continent. Each trip is reliably curated to ensure visitors are gifted with an immersive and authentic adventure. Whether you find yourself strolling along the charming white sand beaches of Sierra Leone, feasting on the mouth-watering delicious foods in Senegal, observing or partaking in various aspects of the Isheshe traditional system Ifa native to Yoruba land, Nigeria, With Danful, you will rediscover a fulfilling sense of kinship to the true heart of the motherland, her communities. Our core values focus on integrity, quality, safety, and sustainability. We are uniquely committed to assisting with the advancement of African infrastructure and promoting African businesses, so both travelers and the communities they visit receive beneficial exchanges. At Danful, we understand the importance of connectivity, and we have created a model which provides bespoke experiences based on your passions or hobbies. With us, expect a long-lasting spiritual bond between you and your destinations. Live, love, Danful, Africa. To learn more, visit danful.africa.
Oh, go ahead, Skywalker.
Hey, how you doing, Dinas? How you doing, my esteemed colleague here? Great analysis as well. Abubat, yeah, Abubat.
Sounds and flavor.
I just want to say that I mean he gave a great analysis of the the climate here, but I will say that me personally, I think that the dollar being the reserve currency. First of all, I think that reserve currency is really rather a term of art, if anything. I think gold is actually the reserve currency. It's always been the reserve currency, and all the dollar is a fiat symbol of currency. And and I think Germany, China was the first ones to do it, but Germany kind of really made fiat currency what it is today when Hitler, after the Great German Inflation, made the Reichsmark and pretty much said, because the Germans was facing a massive amount of inflation to the point that the price of bread went up to like, I want to say like $1,200 or something like, no, $20,000 or something like that, the price of bread. And, but like I was saying, but anyway, so Hitler invented the Reichsmark and pretty much said, we're going to revamp the whole economy. And the Reichsmark is valuable because of belief. So belief is really what gives, I guess the currency is power. But in my opinion, gold has always been the reserve currency, kind of like a stealth reserve currency. But that said, I think that the dollar being this kind of idea of a reserve currency, I think what it has done is caused a lot of strain on the American economic system. And I really don't see a drawback from BRICS, kind of moving away from the dollar. I think that if anything, what that would do, it would tend to kind of drive down inflation in America and make, kind of stabilize the economy, in my opinion. I think there's a few.
Skywalker, apologies. Somehow, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, unfortunately, somehow I was disconnected. Could you please repeat that?
Okay, where did I leave off on, brother?
You stated that you believe that America not having the dollar as the global reserve currency would help because it would stave off inflation and actually help the country. But I know you were saying something before then. So I was asking what came before that statement. Apologies.
Okay, what came before that statement? I was just talking about the history of Germany and kind of how Germany had reinvented their economy after the Great German Inflation by just adding belief and just pretty much saying we're going to invent this currency called the Reichsmark, and it is what it is because we believe it is what it is, and that invigorated belief in the economy, and people started back trading again, yada yada yada. But me personally, I seriously think that BRICS, whatever BRICS is doing, and we got to remember that one of the main differences between America and a lot of these BRICS nations is that America has a very, very strong infrastructure. It has the largest gold reserves in all of the world, not to mention it has several gold mines. So, I mean, America isn't lacking anything. And so, I mean, BRICS can do what it want to do and still, I mean, like I say, if anything, like we got to look the benefits and the drawbacks. You mentioned the drawbacks of America not being a reserve currency when you talked about the amount of borrowing. Obviously being a reserve currency allows America to kind of have a cheaper borrowing interest rate. But one of the benefits of it is that it's going to drive down trade deficits. And so, like I say, when we look at And what we might see is kind of like an American golden age, almost kind of reminiscent of the 1940s after World War II, like in the 1950s when I guess the American dream was kind of at its height.
You mean
So,
like
I mean,
1944 when the Bretton Woods Agreement was put in place?
Exactly. So I understand your arguments. I mean, you give some great arguments here, but I'm just giving like another side. You know, like America has a strong infrastructure, you know, not to mention it has the largest gold reserves in the world. On top of that, having gold mines. And then we have a lot of oil as well. Alaska actually has more oil than Saudi Arabia. So, you know, in my opinion, you know, BRICS isn't really a real threat. You know, I mean, if anything, we see more benefits than we would see drawbacks. But you gave a great analysis.
Let me ask you a question. So there are immense benefits to having your currency being the global reserve currency. You are aware, correct? Okay.
Yeah, there are mixed benefits, but there are also drawbacks.
What would you say some of the drawbacks are?
You mentioned the drawbacks. When I think one of the main ones is it's the cost of borrowing. Being a reserve.
No. Your interest. Okay. Let me re-explain. So now, whenever you're okay. So when you want to be a superpower, right? There are three things that you need, right? Those are the three things that you need. You need to have a global currency, which we'll use America, for example. Global currency, which is the dollar. With the dollar, you create a global economy, an economic system that's based on the dollar, meaning that the dollar is king. And like you said, the 40s and 50s were the American high point because America introduced a currency when the British pound was ruling. And that currency was based on the fact that America held half the world's gold, which it no longer does. However, in the 40s and 50s, it did, up until the Richard Nixon administration in the 1970s, when it decoupled gold from the dollar, and Richard Nixon brokered an agreement with the Saudis in order to only sell oil in dollars, therefore transferring dollars from gold to oil. So you need a global currency, which creates a global economic order. America's global economic order was backed up by the IMF, the World Bank, and a few other structural institutions that guided and created how the American system operates, things like SWIFT. And then lastly, because you're making all this money, whenever you have a global currency, you're making more money than you should. Here's why. People will give you natural resources for pieces of paper that you print out in Washington, D.C. You ever go to Washington, D.C. and you go to the Treasury? They print dollars out on a big sheet and they cut them into small pieces. Back in the days, they used to give you shredded pieces of dollars in little bags. But imagine the advantage that you have when everybody wants these pieces of paper. That's all you give to the world, pieces of paper. You have
exactly. That's one of the.
Hear me out. You have immense advantage. The minute that people don't want your currency anymore, it means that your currency isn't desired. If your currency is not desired, well, then now it's based on what you really do. What do you really produce? What do you really make? And there's going to be vast contraction. It would be better for America to figure out how to keep the dollar as a reserve currency. Because what happens is this. If America loses the ability to maintain the dollar as a global reserve, it will be very bad in this country for at least 20 years until things normalize. 90% of all social services would be scrapped. There'd be no Medicaid, no welfare, none of that. It would be, America's never really gone through, in our lifetime, gone through something called austerity. Other countries, they go through, if you're in Nigeria, you might, or Britain even, you know about austerity. America's never went through austerity. We don't know what that is. We don't know what it is to Think of every social program that you can imagine: welfare, food stamps, WIC, EBT. Imagine all that gets suspended and canceled for the next.
Yeah, see, I don't think that that's the economic consequence
Hear
of
me
it.
out.
I mean, I think
Hear me out. Hear me out. Hear me out. Just hear what I'm saying. Imagine for the next 20 years. That's not a good thing. And that's the result of America losing the dollar as a global reserve currency. So rather than America losing that, the analysis should be, and this is where American media gets it wrong. American media isn't talking about how can America maintain the dollar as a global reserve currency? Because regardless of what you may think, if America loses its position as a global reserve currency, very bad things will happen in this country. The same way it's happened in every other empire. But you have
can I make this? Okay, yeah. But and like I said, I mean that's a great theory, brother. But like I said, I mean but I think it could be viewed in the complete opposite. And I think what you missed when you said I went out, one of the things I said, I actually think that the term reserve currency is more of a term of art. In my opinion, I think gold has always been the reserve currency, in my opinion. Gold has always been the world reserve currency.
Well, you got to remember. You got to remember.
Oh.
That's your opinion, and your opinion isn't right here, because what I would say is maybe you should do a little bit more research, because the reserve currency. Well, let me just tell you, the reserve currency in the early 1900s was the British pound. Then it became the dollar, and it's still been the dollar. So you might have,
and like I say, reserve currency is more of a term of art. You know, I mean, I get what you're saying. I mean, in terms of, everybody is using the dollar around the world, but everybody also uses the gold around the world as a means of exchange. And when you said that if the dollar isn't the reserve currency, Americans are going to still believe in the dollar. And before the dollar became the reserve currency, America was doing just fine with Americans using the dollar. I mean, and like I say, my argument here is just simply that.
Let me ask you a question.
Hold on, let me finish making this point, brother.
Yes, sir.
My argument here is simply that the reserve about a dollar not being the reserve currency isn't going to have the catastrophe.
And then, guys, we got other callers too, so
Okay. This is the last thing I'm going to say, Don. I'm going to get off anyway.
Okay.
But
what I would say to your point is that.
Can I make this last point, brother, before you go?
Yeah, but try to speed it up, because we got a bunch of people and I don't got much time. I got to get out of here soon. But
Well, I was just going to say that I'm all I'm saying is that the dollar not being the reserve currency isn't going to have the catastrophic. And a lot of economists actually agree with me. There's a lot of articles on this, but that it's not going to have the catastrophic effect that a lot of people think it's going to have. Like I say, America was doing just fine before it became the world currency. And like I think somebody even mentioned in the chat. Well, but I'll just leave it right there. But like I said, great analysis, brother.
Just leave it right there. Just leave it right there. You said America will be doing just fine. And thank you for your opinion. I really appreciate it.
Great analysis, bro.
I'll respond to yours, and then we're going to pass the mic to Dennis, who came in second.
It's Prince Steve. It's Prince Steve.
So I'm going to make a comment. Skywalker, thank you. I appreciate your analysis. These are the conversations that we need to have, because, of course, these aren't the conversations that are happening on mainstream media. I will address your point, and then we're going to go over to Prince Steve. It's kind of interesting being in these squares. I feel like I'm in the Brady Bunch. But to address what you just brought up, you said America was doing just fine before America caught fire as the global currency. And that's categorically untrue, because America prior to World War I was going through something called the Great Depression. And the Great Depression was lasting, 12, 15 years?
Yeah, but that's World War I. I'm talking about World War II. America became what it is now because of World War II, brother, not World War I.
Just listen. Both events are related, but just listen. I'll let you talk. Just listen.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's related. The reason it's related is because Germany.
Skywalker.
Okay, we'll go ahead.
Prince Steve's turn after this. You said what you had to say. So getting back to the point I was making is that America was doing terrible. America was failing as a nation. America,
in many ways, it was still a developing nation.
Hey, Donnie, what's going on, man? Hey, Miss Skywalker, if you can't stop me, you got to get out of here, man. You can't keep cutting me off. Saying that type.
Bro, you cut me off the whole time when I was talking.
Skywalker. Abube's our guest. We got to pass the mic, brother.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
So America was going through something called the Great Depression. There was 27% unemployment. World War I and World War II helped push America past the point of struggling into becoming a superpower. This is all historical. It's good to take some time and research this. But what I would say is look up How America Became a Superpower. A very good book on that. Covers everything you're talking about. It's a great read. Prince Steve, we got about 15 minutes left. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we got about 2 minutes per person. If you have a question, the less time you take on the question, the better. We got about 15 minutes left. But brother, you got the floor.
What's up, brother? Good take. I was gonna ask now if the United States loses reserve status, does that mean that the United States needs to become more of a country that exports? Because right now I'm looking at our imports. We import more, which obviously that has to be because of the reserve status. But I'm thinking that the United States, in order to recover from losing that reserve status, it has to be an export country, go back to being a manufacturing country as to the same level that China is. Which
Too late
US
for that.
is
Too late.
Hey, please don't interrupt him. Come on.
which to the fact that the US is number 2 in manufacturing in the world still, even though it imports more than it exports. But I'm thinking that the United States will have to do more goods and services since they want to have the reserve currency. So I'm thinking that is that a thing? If you lose reserve currency, you have to go back to being more of a goods and services economy and having that workforce that can deliver in terms of trade.
Very great question. Now, really, what America should focus on is getting back to being a manufacturing country while it still has the reserve currency. Because by doing that, but unfortunately, and this is, always, I'm a proponent for capitalism, but capitalism, you want a little bit of safeguards on capitalism because capitalism unguarded can be a bad thing. Unfortunately, there were a lot of greedy manufacturers who said, look, I'll hire 1,000 people in this other country, cut out America, and then sell back to America. And of course, there's been problems with that because that really gutted the manufacturing sector. But you brought up a good point. If you produce what you need, you don't need imports. Then if you produce what you need in excess, you now have exports. So you don't have a trade deficit. You're exporting more than you're importing. Now, you can only import more than you export and have a successful country if you have the reserve currency. So for America to maximize their position, rather than waiting to lose the reserve currency, it would be best for America to now focus on bring all that manufacturing back to America. Because in the event and in the off chance that the BRICS nations create an alternative that gets mass adoption, which is stage or step 4, remember, a superpower is born. A superpower weaponizes the system. The weaponization of the system creates fear. That fear leads to others logically creating alternatives. And step 4 is that those alternatives gain mass or critical adoption. So America's in step 3. There are alternatives to the American system. It would be best for America to do everything in its power to manufacture everything that it needs. Because not only is that good when America has the reserve currency, but it's also good just in case America loses the reserve currency. Sir, did that answer your question?
Yes, sir, it did.
All right. So, Adonis, who came in third after Mr. Prince Steve?
Me.
Who's me? Delroy? How you doing,
Yep.
Delroy?
Hey, what's going on, brother?
You got the floor, my man.
All right. Thanks for the presentation. It was very good. But Dennis, we spoke about this before on another platform, and I'm not a fancy lawyer like my brother here, but we spoke about the same thing. I said if America continued to weaponize the dollar, we're going to be in big trouble. Right? We are going to be in big trouble, but I think it's too late right now. Even if they stop weaponizing it now, it's gone. It's out the bag already. China, Russia, and the rest of the BRICS countries. And when I mean rest, I don't mean just the 5. They got like 12 now, I think, and they're getting more, and they're going to get more, and they're going to get more as the years go on, right? China and Russia and everybody else was perfectly fine using the dollar as a reserve currency. They had no problem with it until America started weaponize it, and they weaponize it with even small countries like Zimbabwe, and other countries. It's just silly. Instead of letting it just flow, even if you have problems with those countries, just let it flow. Now it's too late, and this is going to collapse, whether we like it or not. My grandmother had a saying, "Who don't hear shall feel," right? And I'm telling you, it's going to collapse. It's too late. Manufacturing, China have that locked. Okay, it will never come back to the U.S. It will never come back, even if they tried, and they've been trying, and it's not coming back, right? Because they reach a level right now that they.
I gotta interrupt you. Unfortunately, we do have a super chat.
Yeah, let me read this. Jesse Boss Mercer, thank you for $5 holla. We all we got. Thank you, bro.
Daryl, you got
all right. So
apologies,
I'm gonna just leave it there because there's a lot more I wanted to say, but I want to ask you a question.
No, listen, you still got a minute and 15 seconds.
Okay. Now, Russia, the reason why Russia didn't, because Russia in the early 1990s, they had bread lines. They were that bad, and it never led to a civil war. You see what I'm saying? But Europe and America had monopolized them, right? So they prepared for a long time, right? They prepared for 10 years before they went into Ukraine and did what they had to do. You see what I'm saying? But they were prepared. They were prepared with China, with India. They had it all planned out. So when they hit them with all this different sanction it's like 20,000 sanction. It didn't affect them. It actually grew the economy. And I knew American companies was, it was in Russia, and European income was in Russia before all this should happen, right? But I didn't know it was that many. It was that when they put the sanction and those companies start leaving.
Roy, let me ask you a question, because we're running a little short on time on yours. You said it's too late for America to preserve the dollar as the reserve currency. What did you mean by that?
It's because they weaponize the currency. The BRICS is not going to change. It's going to keep growing and growing and growing and growing. Right? It's not going to change. So it's going to be a competitive currency. Now Saudi Arabia is allowing people to buy oil in OPEC with their own currency. Right? Zambia just threw the dollar away. Right? Denmark just
they didn't throw the dollar away. I think it was only 30% of their CBN holdings.
Right. Yes.
So they didn't throw the dollar away.
Yes, but they now but they had that's all they used before. Now they incorporate the yuan, right? The Chinese yuan. They incorporate other currency. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I'm saying it's too late for the dollar to remain
the global reserve
the global reserve currency, because of the weaponization that America's been doing for years. Each party, whether Democrat or Republican.
In the last 20 seconds that you got. Now, wouldn't you say weaponization of the currency is a natural tool of power, or would you say that's something else?
No, I wouldn't. They use it for that. They use it as a national tool for power, but they should not have. Even if they had problems with other countries, they should just let the dollar float, right? Because even those countries, they still have to use the U.S. currency. So they should just let it go, let it float, and work it out some other way. You see what I'm saying? That's what they should have done, right? Now.
You got about 10 seconds.
You're right, but let me ask my question.
Yes,
now,
sir.
We know this economy is going to be effed up. Europe, forget about Europe. England, Germany, all of them. Italy, France. Would, which they talked about before, the U.S. government talked about before, both Democrat and Republican, would canceling the student debt help our economy?
Well,
and they did talk about it before.
Well, I would say that's a drop in the bucket. If America lost the reserve currency, that that actually wouldn't be a good thing because then that's a debt that the government could collect. So the government needs to collect it.
But when it stimulate the economy, dog, right now people are not paying their student loan, bro.
Well, that's another topic. I don't want to get too deep,
You see what I'm saying?
but what I'll
But
say,
wouldn't it help? Wouldn't it allow people to now buy cars, buy homes,
but here's the
don't
thing.
moving back in with their parents, buy? You see what I'm saying?
Let me answer your question. Here's the thing. You have to remember that that's money owed to somebody, and there's somebody who's depending on that money being paid back to them. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say you owe, 100,000 in school fees, and let's say I'm a bank and I buy that debt, right? I bought your debt. I own your debt now because I bought it from a company that didn't believe you could pay it, and maybe I bought it at 60,000. I spent $60,000 in the hopes of getting $100,000. So to say that, hey, the $60,000 I'm expecting, or $60,000 I spent, and the 100,000 I'm expecting doesn't matter. You have to remember, canceling student loan debt means you're taking money out of somebody's pocket. Now,
What about when a person filed bankruptcy?
student loans aren't discharged to bankruptcy unless something's changed recently. But here's what I'm going to say. You brought up a very interesting point initially. We don't want to get too lost into the weeds of the student loans, but I do want to thank you for your submission. It was really good, and but we do have to pass the mic to Prince Steve, though.
No.
Okay.
Steve already won. It's Invisible Man.
Invisible Man, apologies. Invisible Man, you got the floor, brother.
Hey, I really enjoyed this presentation. You must have gotten a joint JD MBA or you're in banking or something, but that was thorough. I really enjoyed it. I posed this question on the panel probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I think you alluded to the fact that you could use minerals as payment. My question then, or my what I posited then was that there are large construction companies, large manufacturing companies, steel manufacturing companies that are Black owned in the United States. And we were going back and forth as to how they could secure payment. Do you see that there could be a transaction to some of those companies if contracts were let, that they could receive gold or diamonds from African countries, Nigeria, building airports, building roadways, building the infrastructure in some of those countries? Do you see that as a way payment could be circumvented if the U.S. Were to stop or prevent the transaction through SWIFT and other electronic payments?
Well, a lot has to happen for the United States to prevent a payment from processing through SWIFT, meaning you'd have to like invade Ukraine, right? Or maybe you'd have to be the Taliban. The government is like, yeah, we're not going to process your payments. Most ordinary people, the U.S. federal government isn't going to step in and prevent you from using global financial institutions or systems. Um, I don't, and if that's a potential situation, I don't want you to be more specific. That's the lawyer in me. But what prevents those businesses from receiving U.S. dollars?
Well, the conversation that was going on, if I remember correctly back then, was that the governments are unstable, and the payment from some of the currencies that are the African currencies aren't transmutable to the dollar. So that was the conversation. So if an American company is not going to be able to go over and get and use the payment in, say, the Nigerian dollar, whatever it's called, and then translate that into the equivalent US dollar, then that was the problem that we were having a discussion about then.
Okay, I'm gonna get to that in just 1 second. Hey, Donis, you got a super chat.
Yeah, Pyramid 6050. Thank you for the 10 Canadian dollars. American debt is in dollars, so basically, America has no debt. They can just print it and pay it.
Yeah, you always got debt. The only thing is that having and Invisible Man. Let me just talk to this
Yeah,
super chat
yeah.
very quickly. The benefit of having the world currency being your currency is you could always print more of it, which is great because there's a lot of confidence when you control the game. Remember, the game is between monopolies and alternatives, and as long as the alternatives aren't viable, you're good. Invisible Man, I would say that most transactions, for example, if you wanted to do it in dollars in Nigeria, you should be able to do it. I would say instead of collecting the local currency, just collect dollars. Get paid in dollars.
Okay. And then finally, what I did not hear was the fact that the U.S. currency is no longer backed by gold. So it's just backed
the
by
U.S. currency hasn't been backed by gold since the Richard Nixon administration. Right. Initially, America took, and America, they did it in a very smooth way. They just got everybody's gold. Everybody was fighting in Europe, World War II. America said, we're going to collect all the gold, and America did that. And then America said, hey, we got all the gold, so we control the system. Smart move, beautiful move. Now, by doing that, America pegged the dollar to gold, and that's why everybody was quick to switch because they said, wait a minute, this currency is backed by gold. There was a time when America would drop off, millions, if not billions of dollars in your central bank, and you could exchange those dollars. You can bring those dollars to America and exchange them for gold and leave with gold. You can go to the American Central Bank with dollar bills and leave with the gold equivalent. It's not like that anymore.
Let me ask you this final question.
Yes, sir.
Haiti is has $20 billion worth of gold that they haven't been able to extract and use. How do you think Haiti can come out of their morass? Do you think? I'll just leave it there as a wide open question for you.
Well, unfortunately, Haiti, they've always been kind of punished. They were one of the first.
20 billion in gold. That's enough to pay off all of their debts. And then
But the thing is, Haiti has had a lot more than that. Haiti, unfortunately, has been punished. They were one of the first few nations in the Western Hemisphere to have people that look like us, our phenotype, to demand their human rights and their freedom. And so, of course, what comes along with that. Haiti has been economically sabotaged for a long time. It's going to be a difficult situation in Haiti until there's somebody who can break through and put everything where it needs to be, because Haiti already has all the pieces to be a successful country. It's just that Haiti's always been put in a position where they have to play within the international community, and then the national community doesn't necessarily give them the greatest seat at the table.
Yeah. Hey, Dinas, I really appreciate this. Mr. Okoli, Lawyer Okoli, I really enjoyed your presentation.
And I enjoyed your questions. But yeah.
Hey, Bube, can you take one more caller or?
Yes, sir. Let's do it. I got it till 9 o'clock. We got a little bit more time.
All right, go ahead, Jay. Unmute yourself.
Yeah. Good night, Bube. Britain had the global currency at one point, right? And they lost it, right?
Yes, sir.
What was the downside for Britain?
Okay.
In terms of how we see the standard of living in Britain and them as a country and the respect they get globally currently.
Okay. So I hear a bit of an accent. Are you from Jamaica?
No.
Where are you from?
I grew up in the Caribbean.
Which Caribbean island?
Why does this matter?
All right, yeah. All right.
Don't worry.
I'm just trying to figure it out, man. I'm asking.
Well, it's okay because I thought you were Jamaican, but here's what I was gonna say. is that there was a time when Britain owned India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Jamaica, Canada to a certain extent. And what happened was that the British Empire, and I thought you were from one of the Commonwealth nations. That's why I was
I am from
asking.
a Commonwealth nation. Yeah,
So you already know
I
what the
grew up in
Commonwealth.
I grew up in a Commonwealth
So you
nation.
already know what the Commonwealth nations were. Why did you, when I asked you that question, why did you not answer?
No, you asked me which island. I know
What's
the
the difference?
Commonwealth,
What's the Rich Island?
Don't
but I
worry,
mean,
don't worry.
it really doesn't matter that
Don't worry,
question
it's okay. Let
because
me answer your
I'm
question.
asking about what's happening now with Britain and how they're viewed globally and their currency, which still has a higher exchange rate than even the dollar. The
Precisely.
euro does too.
Yes. So now with England or with the UK, they instead of going with the euro, you got to remember that they stayed with the British pound, the pound sterling.
Right.
And the pound sterling is a very strong currency, and Britain realized, hey, look, no offense to Europe, but there's a lot of losers in Europe. You got Spain, you got Portugal, you got Italy, you got Greece, you got the Balkans, the former Yugoslavian nations. And Britain looks at itself, and you got to remember, Britain still looks at itself as if it was pre America, meaning that Britain once controlled 25% of the world's landmass, and they kind of still look at themselves as they would have been the top dog if not for America. So when Britain was thinking about linking with the rest of Europe, you got to remember Britain's an island. They had their own thing going. They're going to be okay without the rest of Europe, regardless of what they do, and that's why they've been somewhat independent of the eurozone. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be okay. They're not a place like Czechoslovakia or Poland or one of those kind of nations. They're a nation that can stand completely on their own without colonies. Not even like France. France needs their colonies, their former colonies, I should say, to be able to stand. So when the Britain lost the reserve currency in the 40s, in the 1940s, 80 years ago, things changed. And you got to remember, in I think 1942, there was the rebellion amongst the manufacturers. So, and that almost completely destroyed Britain because what happened is that Winston Churchill, when he saw that America was taking all the shine because America had come up with an economic system that revolved around gold, everybody went to America's system. So Winston Churchill said, "Hey, look, I'm going to peg the British sterling, the pound to gold." And he did that, and that was probably one of the worst mistakes that he ever made. He even admitted that it was one of the worst mistakes later because it was the opposite of inflation. It made British imports way expensive overnight to the point where factories had to shut down because they were non-competitive because you linked everything back to gold. The time had passed. America had already taken that shine. But they came out of that. And of course, Margaret Thatcher. See, whenever a nation loses the reserve currency status, it's hard in the beginning, but they can get back to being okay. Meaning that life, for example, in the UK can be okay. Like life isn't bad in the UK. You can have a very good life in the UK. However, Britain doesn't hold the global gravamen that it held 90 years ago. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but the point I was trying to get to is what you stated last year, that the reality of what happened with them losing that position, it's not like the total disintegration of their country or the economy, right? And so the factors that led to them losing that position, though, are numerous because, for one, as an island with, I think right now they got 53 million people, theoretically they should not even held that position initially, and it was just a matter of time before they lost those colonies because the populations there are bigger, And America, for instance, population was bigger, more land, more space, and more military prowess after World War II and stuff like that. So it was kind of a natural thing that happened. On BRICS, I think BRICS. What do you think? Do you think BRICS will be able to have a currency, and do you think that currency would have to be spent or be like a single monetary unit used by all BRICS nations or participants?
So you asked two questions. You asked the initial question that you asked, and you asked if BRICS is going to have a currency and if that is going to be used among all the nations in some sort of unitary system.
Right.
I'm going to address the first question,
Hmm.
and you got to remember that Britain lost about 92% of its landmass after its empire fell, right? Because you gotta remember, I come from a country that used to be administered by Britain, like from London. They would call the Sultan of Sokoto, the Emir of Kano, the Obi of Onitsha, and the like. And they would tell them, here's what we want to see out of your country, and these are the things that would happen. So to talk about
just to piggyback on that point, they lost America before that.
Yeah, but that was way before they became
right
superpower. So Britain lost. At one point, Britain used to control 25% of the world's land and population. And as you said earlier, Britain, and that's including the UK, which is Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and England, they account for just 55 million people versus
somewhere around there.
Versus if they still administered Bangladesh, which is 200 something million people, India, which is well over 1 billion people, Pakistan, which is 250 million people, Nigeria, which is 250 million people, and then various Caribbean islands. That's what they lost. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get that point. I don't think that it wasn't something they really held to begin with, in a sense, right? Because they never incorporated those countries into their economics and political systems to where the people in those places were citizens of Britain, essentially.
They wouldn't make them. The thing is, they wouldn't make them citizens. That's why it was called the Commonwealth of Nations. So remember, it was the Commonwealth of Nations, and what they would do is you didn't need a visa to go to London.
Right.
You weren't a citizen, but you were within the Commonwealth, which means that, that's why I asked you if you were from one of those Caribbean islands, because maybe your parents grew up in this system.
Right. So that's what I was saying. It was doomed to fail from the get-go. They got what they got out of it, but it would not have been something they could have held in perpetuity. Just like in America. Here's
the thing. If they would have been able to maintain the reserve currency, they would have been able to maintain their empire. But you got to remember, holding the reserve currency is one of the hardest things to do. I mean, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to maintain the reserve currency because it's like being the top dog. You always got people who want to take your position. That's just the reality.
Let me ask you a question on the reserve currency. How do you become a reserve currency? In a sense.
All right.
How do you get a reserve currency?
So now, to become a reserve currency, and this is something I covered during the presentation, but to become a reserve currency, there's going to be a reserve currency before you. And you basically have to wait for them to make a mistake. Remember, there's 4 steps for them to make a mistake. The first step is that they become a superpower, which requires them to have a world currency. Second step, they over-weaponize the system. Third step, over-weaponization creates alternatives. And remember, the game is alternatives versus monopoly. Now, once that happens, alternatives are created. The fourth step is mass adoption of those alternatives. So now remember the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire thought they had everything on lock. They controlled the Mediterranean. The Persians built trade routes all around all of everything that the Romans had built. The Chinese with the Silk Road, they built a whole trade system around the Romans, and they only demanded gold. The barbarians in Europe, they developed their own system, and they had a currency that was better than the devalued bronze coins that the Roman Empire was using. And eventually they fell off. So the thing is, all you have to do is come up with a better system and say, you know what, you guys are using bronze coins. We're going to use gold. Like along the Silk Route, you're going to use gold. Remember, Mansa Musa, when he wanted to travel to Cairo and eventually to Mecca, he brought gold. He didn't use, any fiat currency. He took gold. So the thing is, at the end of the day, you have to maintain being a reserve currency. It's not something you take for granted, but you have to see that the person before you is falling off, and then you take their position based on the weaknesses that they presented to you. That's the reality of life. That's how every cycle goes. The boss eventually gets weak. He gets sedated. He gets comfortable. And the challenger says, you know what? I'm still hungry and I have just as much force, and I'm going to take everything that this person owns, and I'm going to be the new boss. Then you're the new boss for as long as you can maintain that position. But it looks like we're running low on time.
Can you take one more caller? You got 8 minutes. Is that cool, or you got to dip early?
Right, let's do one more. Let's do one more. I got to try in the morning, but let's do one more.
All right, go ahead, Bang. Unmute yourself. Bang, unmute yourself. All right, going once, going twice. All right, we'll close out. All right, go ahead.
Can I ask Ubube one of the quick question?
It's up to him.
You know what? If you're doing about 30 seconds, what's the question?
Yeah, it's going to be quick. So in the 4 metrics that you laid out to become a reserve currency, right? That switch between the US and Britain, were those standards used or met in that situation?
Of course. And if you haven't seen the presentation before, I'd say check those out, because that's everything that was laid out. But what I will say is, I want to thank everybody for their time. This has been a great experience as usual. Hey, Dennis, we got to do a couple more.
You just tell me, Abube. I'm always ready.
We got to cover more of this BRICS topic. I'm seeing that there's a lot of people who there's more information that needs to be disseminated. And I think that breakdowns like these are beneficial, because it gives people a clearer understanding, because they can rewind this and play it back. And shout outs to Fitzgerald. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention, Dennis. I read it for you. But Dennis, I'm gonna let you go ahead and close out everything, brother.
Hey, Abube, shout out your channel.
Yes, geopolitical analysis, up close and center. I haven't dropped anything in quite some time. I've been busy running my law firm, but I do have some things that I'm going to put together. I'm working on some AI for the presentation, but when that drops, I think it's going to change the game in positive ways. But once again, my name is Abube Akoli. I own a law firm here in Atlanta. We focus on defense, criminal defense, and also too, I'm a geopolitical analyst. And I do want to thank everybody here. What you have to remember before you get out of here, please go ahead and like this channel, because we do things that the mainstream media isn't doing. Also, too, we give people a chance to call up and ask real questions and air their opinions. So if you haven't hit that like button, go ahead and hit that like button. If you haven't hit that subscription button, go ahead and hit that subscription button, and we'll go from there.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Like, share, subscribe. To the family, Dynasty Mirror, search for Huru. Peace.
Danfo offers unparalleled, curated, and bespoke tours across Africa for travelers seeking genuine cultural experiences, enriched with magnificent sights, sounds, and flavors found on the continent. Each trip is reliably curated to ensure visitors are gifted with an immersive and authentic adventure. Whether you find yourself strolling along the charming white sand beaches of Sierra Leone, feasting on the mouth-watering delicious foods in Senegal, observing or partaking in various aspects of the Isheshe traditional system Ifa native to Yoruba land, Nigeria, with Danfo, you will rediscover a fulfilling sense of kinship to the true heart of the motherland, her communities. Our core values focus on integrity, quality, safety, and sustainability. We are uniquely committed to assisting with the advancement of African infrastructure and promoting African businesses, so both travelers and the communities they visit receive beneficial exchanges. At Danfo, we understand the importance of connectivity, and we have created a model which provides bespoke experiences based on your passions or hobbies. With us, expect a long-lasting spiritual bond between you and your destinations. Live, love, Danfo, Africa. To learn more, visit danfo.africa.